In desktop or Windows or web applications, we call them as frames. And in web applications, we call them as iframes. But we are limited to web applications. When you inspect any frame in a web application, the tag names are, you will find frame, iframe, or form. Before going to discuss how you can interact with frames, or I can say iframes, what is a frame or iframe? A web page is divided into multiple sections. Each section is called as iframe or frame. A web page is divided into multiple sections, and each section is called as frames or frame or iframe. So why we need to handle frames? Suppose go to here. This is some demo website. In this particular website, you will see a frame here. This is a frame. So let me inspect this so that you can understand what are the tags it will be having. Take this and go here and try to inspect this. If you see, this is the HTML code of this particular element, which is nothing but a frame. And if you see here, it is having a tag name of iframe. And inside frame, you'll have the text box. And even if you see this particular text box is present inside the frame. If you try to close this and if you try to expand this, you'll get to know. Inside the frame, we'll have this particular element. Then, if there is any element inside the frame, definitely you need to switch to this particular frame and you need to interact with element. Otherwise, you will not be able to do any actions when the element is present inside the frame. If there are any elements present inside a frame or a iframe, we cannot directly interact with or do not do any validations on those elements if there is inside a frame or iframe. So we need to switch to this particular frame and we can do whatever the actions on that particular element. Very important. Whenever there is any element inside the frame, first you need to switch to this particular frame. Then you can do any actions or you can perform any actions on this particular element. Not only this element, any elements. Then this is a frame, only one frame. If you see here, you have two frames. One is, I can say it is an outer frame. Inside outer frame, you have another frame. It is nothing but a inner frame. Frames inside the frames is nothing but nested iframe or nested frame. So if there is any element inside nested frames also, the same thing we need to do. We need to switch to that particular frame. Then we can perform actions on that element. Whatever we want. Very important. Let me note that. What is a inner frame? A frame within another frame. It is called as inner frame. So that inner frame contains that elements or elements. It is a frame, and inside the frame you have another frame, and inside this frame you have another element. So it is nothing but inner frame. Then first thing is you need to switch to this any frame and you can interact with the elements inside the frame. Then how you can switch to the frame, or how you can switch to default content, or how you can switch to parent frame if you have multiple frames. You will see right now. These are very important syntaxes. So you need to switch to frame. So during switching, you can specify name or ID of the frame, switch to dot frame, like switch to dot alert, you have switch to dot frame. And for this, you can specify name or ID of the frame as a parameter if name or ID of frame is available. You can switch to the same frame, assuming that it is a web element. If there is no name and ID, we can identify that particular element as a web element and we can switch to that particular frame. Another way is switching by index. If there are no attributes and if you have multiple frames, then we can specify the index value of that particular frame. These are the three ways how we can switch to frame. How you can switch to main page? You can use switch to dot default content. When you use this, it will switch back to main page. Then, as we discussed, a frame can contain multiple frames inside it. So if you are at the last in a frame, and directly if you want to switch to outer frame or the parent frame, then you can use switch to dot parent frame. These are the ways how you can interact with frame and switch to main page and switch to parent frame. Let me go to PyCharm. Let me create date 24, 27. Inside date 27, let me create a Python file, nothing but a module. Handle frames. So inside this, all the steps are common steps. What are all the common steps which we need to do before performing any action on the element? We need to import WebDriver. We need to import by, if I want to find any element through any locator, decide capabilities, experimental option, initializing a driver variable, opening the URL. After opening, you can maximize the browser window and you can implement the wait to avoid synchronization problem. Yes, with the help of driver variable, in this particular website, I can switch to frames. Let me execute this. If you see here, it has opened this particular website. It has maximized the browser window. Next thing is, there is element inside the frame and which is nothing but text box. I need to interact with this text box. How I can interact? First, I need to switch to this particular frame. Then I can interact with this element. So my action is to send text to this particular text box, like some XYZ. Before going to send any text, I need to identify this particular frame and thereafter this particular element. If you see here, let me identify this. This is the HTML code of this. In this HTML code, it is having a tag name of IFrame. As we discussed, a frame or IFrame can have the tag name of frame, form, or IFrame. In this particular website, you have IFrame. If you see, we can switch to this particular frame by using ID or name or index, or I can identify the same web element or frame as a web element. But right now in the HTML, I have ID as well as name. So I can use ID for switching to that particular frame. Driver dot switch to dot frame. And I can specify that ID of that particular frame in the single or double quotes. After switching to this particular frame, I need to send text into this particular text box. Let me identify this. If you see, it is having only one attribute type and the tag name is input. So let me write the XPath at the rate type is equal to text. It is what it is having. And what is the tag name? Input. This is the tag name. And I can specify the index here. In the index, I can specify that particular element as 1. Or this particular locator anyway identifying 2 elements, even though index is specified. What I can do, I will use find element method. So when I use find element method, this particular element will return the first element, which is this particular element. You can take this as assignment. You can write the exact locator which identifies that particular element. Now let me take this, go to PyCharm, driver dot find element by dot xpath, and I can specify that particular locator here. So after switching to that frame, what I'm doing, I'm trying to switch or interact with that particular text box. After interacting, I need to send some random text. So the text may be some random XYZ. Right. Up to now, let me execute this. Run handle frames. If you see here, it has switched to this particular frame and it has interacted with the text box. And inside the text box, it has entered some random text. Then you need to understand another important point. It is, or the driver is focused on inside this frame. Very important. But if there are any elements outside the frame, suppose you can take this particular button. This is outside this frame, but right now the driver is focused on inside the frame, and inside the frame it is focused on the text box. And there is a button which I want to interact. That button is outside that particular frame where the driver is focused. So I should say the driver, hey driver, switch to default page or the main page, then interact with this button. Otherwise, I won't be able to interact with this button. Let me show you that. Before that, let me execute the same script without switching to that particular frame. So if I don't switch to particular frame, I won't be able to interact with the text box inside that particular frame. Let me execute this. You'll get an exception after 10 seconds because you have already implemented implicit wait. If you see here, it will wait for 10 seconds because we have specified the time in the implicit wait as 10 seconds, and you will see no such element exception. That element not found, but that element is present, but that element is inside the frame. So I am not switching to that particular frame before interacting with that element. So that is the reason why we have got no such element exception. Yes. So if there is any element, I need to switch to that particular frame. Very important. Now the driver is focused on inside the frame. But I want to interact with the element which is outside this particular frame, which is iframe within an iframe. Let me inspect this. If you can see here, this is the HTML code. And if you see, it is a link and it is having some link text. I can identify this particular element with the help of link text. So what I will do, without switching to main page, I will try to interact with this particular element so that we will get to know whether it is interactable or not. Driver dot find element by dot link text it is having, and I can specify the link text locator here or the value here. And after finding this particular element, I need to perform the click action. Yes, what I am doing, I am just doing before switching to main page. The driver is again focused inside that particular frame. It is not focused on the web page because that particular element is on the main page. Let us try to see. Before this, let me write one switching statement, driver dot switch to dot default content. When I say default content, the driver is which is focused on inside the frame. It will be focused on the main page. Let me comment this for now, and let me try to interact with the element which is outside that frame. Run handle frames. If you can see here, it can switch to single frame, and inside that single frame there is an element. It has interacted with that element, but after that I ask for the driver, just click on this particular element, but it is not able to click. And you can see here, element, no such element exception, because still the driver is focused inside the frame only. It has not switched to main page. So you need to switch to main page. How I can switch? I can use switch to dot default content. This is the command which I need to use. When I say default content, it will switch to main page. In the main page, if I want to interact with any element, I can interact after switching to main page. Let me execute it one more time. And if you can see here, it is taking some time. Don't worry, it will try to maximize this. Yes. It has switched to this out enough, single frame, and interacted with this element. Thereafter, it has clicked this and it has landed onto this particular page. This is what we have done right now. And inside this particular page, we have two elements. One is outer frame, the other is inner frame. Inside the inner frame, there is another text box. So what we need to do? We need to switch to outer frame, and I need to switch to inner frame. And inside the inner frame, you can interact with this particular element. Let me try to inspect this. If you can see, first we need to interact or identify that particular outer frame, and this is the outer frame. And this particular frame, which is nothing but outer frame, is having only source attribute. And for this, we are having multiple frames. .html is the value. And inside this outer frame, I have inner frame. This inner frame is also having only one attribute, src, and its value is single frame.html. Multiple frames.html and single frame.html. So I need to switch to outer frame first, then I need to switch to inner frame, then I can interact with the text box. So let me find the outer frame. If you can see here, this is outer frame. For the outer frame, we are having source multiple frames.html. For the inner frame, what I can do, I can try to take this, try to use it here. Inside multiple frames, I can use single frame.html. So after identifying outer frame, this is the outer frame. I need to switch to outer frame. Then I need to identify this inner frame. I need to switch to this inner frame. Then I can interact with this element. So this is the inner frame. If you can see, you can take this particular locator and go here. Yes, it is not identified because of that particular thing. So this is the locator. So what I can do, instead of this, I can write an absolute XPath, but you can take this as an assignment. So try to write an relative XPath. I'm just writing absolute XPath here. Yes, that will be fine. Switching to outer frame, switching to inner frame. Then the same locator which I have used, I can use it here for interacting with the text box. Let me execute this. So let me comment single frame. Let me execute inner frames. Yes, if you see here, it has clicked this particular button. It has switched to outer frame. It has switched to inner frame, and thereafter it has interacted with this particular input box. If you are not able to, or if you are not switching to outer frame or inner frame, we will not be able to find this particular element, as we have seen whenever we are interacting with an element which is inside a single frame. For now, you can try to comment this outer frame, because I'm just doing or interacting with the text box without switching to outer frame. So if I am not able to switch to outer frame or not switching to outer frame, definitely inner frame is also not able to found, and thereafter that particular text box as well. Let me execute this without outer frame, switching to outer frame. If you can see here, we cannot interact with any element inside the frame. Definitely you need to switch to frame if it is a frame by default. See, no such element. Inner frame is not able to find. Thereafter, we can also not able to find that particular text box. In this way, you can interact with frames. Suppose if I want to interact with any element which is inside the frame, definitely I need to use driver dot switch to parent frame dot parent frame. After switching to parent frame, I can interact with any another inner frame, and if there is any element inside that inner frame, definitely I can able to interact with it. Driver dot switch to frame, and thereafter I can close that browser window, close or quit. In this way, we can handle outer frames, inner frames, switching to parent frame, and switching to main page. Switching to main page is different, and switching to parent frame is different.